We live.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another super spectacular Sunday special with this superfluous bunch of super individuals. Let's get this kicked off. We've got Piotr Rusinek, Adam Lawrence, we've got Happy Birthday Helen, we've got Helen Chorley, we've got me, Jay Howard. That is, of course, the enigmatic Mr. Ross Harper. We're actually here on an international basis. There's only two of us, one in the East Midlands, one in the West Midlands. So really wrapping up the Black Country a bit. Then we've got Portugal, Malta, Dubai. We're all over the gaff these days, but we're all drawn together. We kind of like each other's company. That's always a good place to start. But we do love to chat absolute bollocks every Sunday, and you're welcome to join us. As always, we share and share alike. You're welcome to come here, sit, chill, ask us questions. We love answering questions. But if you don't ask us a question, we're going to go off on multiple tangents, going in different directions, but it's always a magical conclusion. So this week we will be discussing generosity. I think we mentioned something in the back end of last week's call about the people not being able to see the difference between the cost of a thing and the value of a thing. So we're going to be kind of just addressing that because I think one way or another we all experience that. At some point in our professional or in our business lives, or even in our family lives, or any kind of relationship, a lot of people don't really kind of resonate that there is a value and there is a cost to everything that you say and that you do. So we won't get too theoretical or too philosophical. But who's going to kick us off?
Well, can I at the risk of diverting it a little bit, let's just say, can I get on my soapbox for the first, say, 90 seconds, which might just blossom a little bit from 90 seconds?
Yes. Welcome back. We missed you last week.
Actually want, Adam?
The thing that really rings in my mind when we start talking about a topic like this is pricing strategy and signaling to an extent. So, like I say, this is risky in the present company, but I'm going to go for it. One of the things that gets abused quite a lot in property, but also is a sensible thing to have a really good understanding of, is pricing as a signal. So if you look at the biggest brands in the world, I'll tell a quick story about Smirnoff vodka, for example. The massive vodka brand. They're not just Smirnoff vodka. They've got lots and lots of brands, lots and lots of drinks, lots and lots of things going on. There's a group company over the top of it and all the rest of it. There's a fairly famous business case study of when Absolute Vodka started to compete with them on a serious basis and take some of their market share. I think was it Absolute Vodka, or do they own Absolute? I can't remember, but it was a vodka that would have been at the time considered a premium brand of vodka. And the initial thoughts were Smirnoff needed to drop their price so they could compete on a pricing basis. But actually what they did was they raised their price to the price of the premium brand, saying basically, thank you for providing that signal that we are a premium brand, because we are. And they used one of their inferior brands, which I think was Russian Standard, and they dropped the price on that to capture the sort of lower part of the market. So they get to take the share of the people who are very price conscious. They get to use the psychological signal of the premium brand quality, and then they put their own premium brand over and above both of the top of them. And this is what started the trend of getting people to pay 25, 30. I mean, whiskey's slightly different because it's always had a really premium market. But if you go into the supermarket now and look at gin, for example, there's things over all price ranges that just didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. And that sort of stratification in your pricing. Now, look, in a large corporate, you probably applaud it as a brilliant way of doing business. But how that translates to property quite often is, I think, in the educational sector, where people use certain elements of trickery to make it feel like it's the same price as, for people who've been in large corporates, they know that training is very, very expensive. So when you see a 20, 30,000 pound course, whatever, you think, if you're from a large corporate background, you think, well, the signal is being given to me there it must be good value. It must be good value. And what it then does to you psychologically is, even when you've been through the course, if it was no good for you, you still find ways of justifying it to yourself because you've paid so much money.
Yeah.
So all the gurus know this stuff. They don't know it in a really business school level. I'm going to be a bit of a knob about that really and call them out on that. They know it on a, we learned it on American Sales and Marketing 101, kind of boiled down, pathetic course that they went on. But it is true and it does work. And it's the price ends in a 7 and all the rest of it. It's all part of the same playbook. And it's one of the things I find hardest to deal with in property is that price is not a signal. There are good builders who are expensive. Not all expensive builders are good builders, and that's where your problems start just on a refurbishment perspective. And that applies to personal development. It applies to the building. It applies to locations. Do you want to buy in the locations where the capital growth has already happened, or do you want to find the next locations for capital growth and reasons to be bullish? And the latter has served me extremely well over the past decade, and it's a strategy I'm continuing to follow. So price, and just as a little other aside, pricing strategy absolutely fascinates me because so few people do it on any sort of level when they start a business. They don't look at, one of the things we did, Rod and I, when we went into the Genesis Centre to start analysing what was going on, what was going right, what was going wrong, what we needed to do, was we undertook a competitor analysis exercise. Now the person who was already working there has been working there for 8 years. She's perfectly capable of doing this sort of level of research, but she'd never been told to do it. She'd never been taught to do it. No one had ever thought to do it. Now to us, it was just the basic premise of where to start. And especially obviously one of the opportunities you had throughout COVID was to reprice things, because certainly in the leisure industry, we had a period of closure, so what went before was kind of irrelevant. And of course, because we were anticipating significant inflation, we needed to take that into account. We also needed to take into account, once you set, and this is a classic for anyone listening who's ever negotiated on a salary, which should be anyone who's ever had a job, really, depending on, not if you've gone and worked behind a bar or something, because I don't believe there's lots of negotiation at minimum wage or whatever. But generally speaking, if you've ever negotiated a salary, and I've certainly used this myself years ago, the first negotiation is the one to really, really concentrate on, because you will be benchmarked by that for the rest of the time you're at that company. And yeah, look, you can leave, you can go somewhere else every 12 months, 18 months. It's not uncommon these days, but it does mean you might struggle to make an impact somewhere. And it does mean after doing it 10 times, some people are going to look at your CV and go, well, what's the point? I don't want someone who's going to hang around for 12, 18 months. I want someone I can get at least 5 years out of, So that element of benchmarking that goes on whenever if you start something and say, we'll start a club and it's £10 a month to join. And then one day we turn around and say, now it's really good, right? The 5 of us are in it and it's brilliant. And actually now it's £1,000 a month. That's a really big stretch. Whereas if we came out and said, we've got a club and it's £1,000 a month to join, some people would go, well, actually, I could maybe see the value in that. But the benchmarking side of it makes it really difficult. So that's kind of an absolute shotgun of concept that sort of fit around just the price, really, rather than the sort of the generosity and the value angle, which obviously is super important as well. So does anyone want to pick up any of those pellets and threads from there?
So I'd like to ask the question, the way you've phrased that and the way you've set that up, you're suggesting that the value of the property education courses, just to use that starting point, is not good.
Well, I think it depends what you want and where your expectations are set, because one of the problems is you're promised all these things on the way in that are generally not delivered. Now, that doesn't necessarily, this is someone put a great comment on a post of mine that was about COVID a few weeks ago, an old friend of mine from university. And he said, look, I think you've got to understand that we should be discussing it, that perhaps this is going back to December, but maybe Boris Johnson has done the right thing for the wrong reasons. And sometimes that happens. And I fundamentally believe these days, through my own experiences, that education really splits into 3 parts. One is the actual imparting of the knowledge. 2 is the soft skills that you can learn of being around the right people and getting the right sort of training. And 3 is the network that it leaves you with. Now, if those were the 3 things that were promoted in property education, then I could understand And certainly we can debate I've seen lots of stuff that's gone wrong, but I've said in the past I'm biased because I hear about the problems. I don't hear about the mega students who never need to come to me or anybody else to sort their problems out because they don't have any. I don't think there are too many people like that, but there are obviously lots of award winners and things that have been through, some of the big corporate trainings that, have not had these sort of levels of problems. But I think the network would be the one that anybody would struggle to diminish the value of. And it could be that the network on its own, I've had people before who are relatively distressed who've got buyer's remorse saying, I've signed up to XYZ and it's 20 grand plus VAT or whatever, and I don't feel I'm getting much out of it. And I say to them, look, make the most of the network, because that's what you're going to take on for the next decade and beyond. The people that you meet from it, look, they've already shown they're highly motivated. They can raise capital. They're keen to make an improvement in this space. They're probably quite keen on developing themselves. Those are good people to be around. And you've got a 12-month or whatever it is opportunity, or however long you've got left, to make the most of that network of people. So I think on the traditional educational, I've seen lots of stuff that's just wrong, Ross, really, as you have, to be honest with you. And I have a fundamental problem with that because, when, for example, we've been together at training events and we've been really genuinely concerned about the people who are there and the knowledge they're being left with and what's going to happen to them in the future. That is definitely a concern. But if you focus on the soft skills and the networking side and some of the negotiation skills and all those things you might be able to take away, obviously you've got a very wide variety of background of people in terms of age, in terms of experience, in terms of risk tolerance. You've got people who shouldn't be there, if we're brutally honest. Yep. And, anyone who the entry criteria is your credit card has got a 20 grand limit, and actually we might phone someone up in the morning to try and extend your limit to 20 grand so you can buy the course in the afternoon. That's a fundamental problem. That's seriously unethical and very bad business. But if there is a level of entry criteria where some people get turned down, then that will at least give you some comfort that they're looking for the right people, and they're not looking to take money off people where it's not worth it. Apart from
so one of the things, though, I think fundamentally for property in particular, it's so much easier for course sellers to up the cost or the price of the course because of the value of the product. So if you look at an average terraced house or semi-detached house being worth 130 or 140 or 150,000 pounds, to sell somebody the benefit of getting a discounted house or getting a portfolio of these things, to pay 20, 30, 40, and I know guys that have paid 70, 80, 90, 100,000 pounds and still don't have any property. It's really strange.
See, I mean, here's a couple of really interesting points. I really love the fact, Adam, that you pointed out the fees in these courses ending in a 7, which is like an adrenaline shot of NLP master training, right? That's where they fish it out of all of this kind of vapid level, kind of superficial psychosomatic crap that is punted around, right?
Brilliantly put.
And there's an element of learning a bit of it and understanding it almost as a shield and a defense mechanism, right? Because the more you know, the better prepared you are to go forward. The other thing on the education stance is actually, and I think this is a global pandemic without going into COVID chat, is actually education in general fails more people than it benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Always has, because it started off as literally a daycare camp where workers who were starting at 6 a.m. and finishing at 6 p.m. could drop off their sprogs. So industrialists made sure that they were still getting a return on investment from the parents. And as soon as the children hit 4 or 5, they could chuck them in the pits with them. So the education system has been born out of that.
I own a Victorian school building in Glasgow, which was the first, called the Half-Time School. It was the first one in commercial terms where they had the kids going half the time and then half the time in the factories, owned by Coates Viella at the time, Peter Coates.
Yeah.
Well, I say I own it.
I take it they still do that, Ross, do they, under your ownership?
They're all doing due diligence. half the time they're doing skip rope, and the other half of the time they're doing reverse GDV calculations.
Mate,
that would be worthwhile training.
They're doing strip outs, low level strip outs up to a bit.
They got their little bricks and their little hammers. I mean, but the reality of the situation is, I mean, the point I was about to make is exactly that. There is no one universal way that people learn. Not everyone that is gonna learn by sitting in front of a teacher, in front of a chalkboard or a whiteboard, and will understand what's going on. There are a lot of people that understand from experience, taking part, practicality. There are people that understand from writing every fucking word down and rereading it 2 or 3 times. I may or may not be someone like that. Right? There are so many different ways that works. And then you have to think about the quality of education. How many people here, before you went on to advanced degrees, learned about taxes or insurances, or learn anything practical about how to survive in the world? Algebra is lovely. I mean, whoever decides to stick letters with numbers is probably burning in a fiery cesspit in hell somewhere for the sheer disgust that 90% of the population must have for that person's soul. But the reality of the situation is, who uses it apart from Helen? But you know what I mean? Like, okay, you use the English language. It's nice to know that there are X number of elements on the periodic table, and that, you know, an apple fell on someone's head. Now we know that gravity is real and all that kind of stuff. It's nice, but it doesn't get you from A to B very well. And I think one of the things that education, you know, even if you take property education specifically, one of the ways it fails actually is it treats everybody as equals.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with where society's heading at the moment.
Yeah.
Is
that's
actually
very interesting.
Equality is actually dangerous. Equity is nice.
Just be a bit. I think actually, probably to just clarify that a little bit, well, certainly my own personal view is to adopt the Peterson style characterization there, which is equality of opportunity is highly desirable. Equality of outcome is effectively impossible and is a fool's errand.
Absolutely.
And that really frames it quite. And we have got. It's interesting you say that, because we've got.
I'm writing that down. What we say, equality of.
Equality of opportunity. It's very much a Jordan. We've moved into Jordan Peterson territory, essentially,
absolutely.
Right? Because
his pet project, absolutely.
It is. I mean, that whole idea of equality of outcome. He was talking to. The interview was brilliant. And when it first came out, they kind of only released part of it, made him seem like a real chauvinist. And then someone released the full thing, and actually he didn't look like a terrible human being. He had a valid point. There was a part where he was like, okay, well, you know, 98% of people who are bricklayers are men. Should we now force 48% of women that are in that kind of era to go and be bricklayers? Should they be, because that's the outcome. It has to be equal. And do you have to have equal qualities of blacks, whites, Asians? You have to have equal numbers of 18 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 36-year-olds. Do you have to have equal amounts of Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, whatever kind? Does it all that? Because that's the equality, isn't it?
Well, I think it goes even further than that with him, because I think really when you look at equality of outcome and you think about political systems that are driven towards forcing equality of outcome, you're inevitably pushed towards communism. And you know, Peterson is very keen to remind everybody how many hundreds of millions of people died in the 19th and 20th centuries under communist regimes. So that's not to totally malign and throw out the workings of Karl Marx, some of which are very interesting, but it is to say, look, I think what we all know, really, generally speaking, communism in practice sounds lovely, but in reality, it ends up in the most horrific outcomes that society has ever seen. And that's why one thing we should remember when we're maligning capitalism. But it's interesting because as COVID, and if we see like Omicron is the end of, you know, it's going to crowd everything out and it's a little bit more than a cold, effectively, but everyone's going to get it and it's still more virulent, right? If that is the outcome, which looks probabilistically, you know, the favourite outcome at the moment, then the post-COVID era is really going to start. And one of the conversations we're already having, but we're going to be having a lot more, is what has the last 2 years done for inequality? And then you've got to move into, are we talking about wealth inequality, or are we talking about income inequality? Because at a simple level, we've all known the people who earn 200 grand a year who've never got any money. And we've all known the people, I think, probably who earn 20 grand a year and still somehow got money for what they want to do. So, you know, the actual number isn't everything by any stretch of the imagination. And when you move from, if you're on that journey from income to wealth, then there's a lot of mindset involved in that. And a lot of, I see people all the time and think the problem is, you know, and this sounds awful, but the problem is I think you're thinking like someone who's going to be poor for the rest of their life. And you've got to shape that mentality. And then you've got to, and it comes, and this is where Peterson will go into individual responsibility over the collective, you know, because, and I can personally say, I've never known anyone, the one common thread I know through people I would perceive as successful in life, and that doesn't necessarily correlate to wealthy, because I know lots of wealthy people I'd never like to emulate that I've met who are unhappy and all the rest of it, but successful people have taken responsibility for themselves and they have done their own thing. And I'm not going to go into is it Molly May who got slammed on social media for what she said? I'm not going to do the full Molly May because, you know, there's a poll this morning on Will Mallard and Sue Maxwell's Facebook group, UK Property World, about what is it that builds wealth or whatever. And I've put my own, of course I have, I've put my own answer in, and my own answer is luck plus skill plus something like tenacity plus mindset. That's my equation. And you could represent that algebraically if you wanted, Jay, topically enough, as you know, as long as Diophantus isn't turning in his grave after all those nasty things you said about algebra, we'll be fine. But yeah, I did say it was a risk of taking this conversation off topic. So.
Well, we are very much down the rabbit hole, Adam. We followed Alice into the deep dark depths of gosh, yeah.
And 90 seconds has become 22 minutes. Unbelievable.
And that's how it works. That's how. That's just like
Chancellor of the Exchequer. That's how looking. All I can say.
That's just like the sales funnel. You know, just come into my web, and then you will leave knowing how to buy 4 million properties and all the rest of it. You know, Dubai.
That's the real problem, though, isn't it? It's the promise.
Yeah,
that's the real problem. The promise is the problem because and you can't speak for everybody, but of the people that I know that do property education, they are experienced enough to be able to turn around to someone and say, actually, don't do that, do that. It works better if you do this. And you know, you can watch all the YouTube videos you want and you can talk to a million people, but it may be for, I don't know, what's the standard thing? $2,000, whatever it is. You know, the standard thing, maybe that's the one nugget that you take away that then saves you £2,000 per future project, in which case you're talking about a monster magnifier, right? But the element of the networking, that's the bit that is completely intangible in value.
Yeah.
Which raises this question, like, how did you guys come to a price point for PIP? Right, because the reality of the situation is there's clearly a cost versus value metric. I'm personally a fan, so I can say actually the value outstrips the cost.
Yeah,
and ideally, if you're a value-based person, that's where you want to be sitting in your market, right? You don't necessarily need to be the cheapest, but you need to provide the most value for whatever cost it is that the person is incurring.
I just love this because we move over to the sort of value proposition concept. And again, if I went back to, I've not directly mentioned my MBA as yet, so I think I probably should do that at this point. But if you look at Richer Sounds, the business, you know, it's a famous case study of someone who came into a market and did the very, very difficult thing, which is provided more for less money, more for less. It's the most crazy, and it's commercially probably not very clever. But if you look at, his name escapes me, James something I think it is, but the guy who founded Richer Sounds, he's an incredible individual. He's one of these guys who, at the end of his career, and he's obviously got enough money and all the rest of it, he's given something like 75 or 99% of the business to the people who've worked in the business. And you know, he's just one of those really inspirational people. And it's a particularly interesting case study. But generally, you don't go for more for less. And the value proposition that we went for was more for more, in as much as, what are you comparing PIT to? If you compare it to some of the day training masterminds that you can do, or let's call them mastermind lights rather than the full sort of mastermind format that some of the training companies offer, you know, they're between 150 and 300 quid a day. That's what the traditional sales funnel tells you to do. You know, get them in with your ebook and then do this, then do that, and all the rest of it, right? So we decided we want to be cheaper than that. We also decided we wanted to be more expensive than a networking meeting, because we were much more than a networking meeting. So, yeah. but PIP it's a lever, and again, that benchmarking thing comes back. Over the years, I've had so many people say, "Oh my God, it's such good value." You know, I shouldn't say this because they know. But the thing is, you're not going to put what do we want to achieve as the partners? Certainly, my own take on that, Ross might squash me for saying it, but it is to provide exceptional value. Now, there will always be people who don't see it as good value, because if they look at it on one level as, well, it's 20 quid to go to XYZ meeting and it's 50 quid to go there, whatever it is, then yeah, okay, you could say, but I'd say they're framing it incorrectly. And for years, you know, we went saying, you know, we're not an education company, we're not this, we're not training company, we're not all the rest of it. But then when your members are saying to you, I've learned so much from coming here, I've done these deals, I never would have done this deal if I hadn't listened to you talk about this deal, or listened to Ross talk about this development, or auctions, or all the rest of that stuff. It's kind of like, well, you can say what you want, but what you're delivering is what you are, realistically. So this is why one of the problems I have with the property education companies as we frame it, because they're not property education companies. They are sales and marketing companies, right? And that's proven by the fact that at the merest drop of a hat, they will go off-piste to Forex, Amazon, Bitcoin, the whole 9 yards, you know. So that's nothing to do with property. It is to do with it, but they're not. Please don't tell me they're going to market themselves as investment mentors and companies, because they get absolutely destroyed with their methodologies. So you are what you deliver to. It's the same as that argument around your values. You know, I get sick of people saying, I've had people say to me in the past, you know, I'm ethical, I'm this, I'm that. And then you watch the way they behave, and they're totally not. They're totally not. Now, some of that is subjective. Some of it would be, you and I, Jay, could have a long chat about ethics, because I'm sure we've both studied it at a decent level for a long period of time. But, you know, some of it's subjective, some of it is largely objective, realistically. And therefore, you know, you are what you say. If you spend your whole time, you know, doing nothing, then one of your highest values is not hard work. that much is self-evident, right? And so it's the same as that. You are what you deliver. And if you try and to flip that on its head, when you try and conceptualize a strategy for any kind of business or whatever, then you've got to mean what you say. And this is why people say you need to be authentic. And perhaps that's a good way to segue back into generosity, because generosity is a really, really, in my experience, is a really difficult thing to fake. You know, some people are, I hope not to embarrass him by saying this, but Ross is one of the most generous people that I've ever met, right? And if you go on Rod's podcast, he asks you at the end, what's the kindest thing anyone's done for you in business? And I said, you know, both Ross and Rod actually have both been extremely generous with their time with me, and Ross over a period now of, you know, what's knocking on about 7 years. Someone who is as busy and has as much, if he sat and said, right, my time's worth XYZ an hour, which he could easily do, and it'd probably be A, B, C, D, E, F, G rather than XYZ, then he wouldn't have given me the time of day that he's given me. But ultimately he has. And I know that he's done that for lots of other people. And some of those have blossomed into working relationships, and some of them have turned to nothing. But that's a natural generosity, I believe, that then comes out through, and this sort of, if you take that up to the very, very sort of meta level, you know, a Warren Buffett, for example, why doesn't, someone said to me a while ago, so, well, Warren Buffett's so generous, why doesn't he give all his money away? Right now, this is to a man who's given away, I don't know, 30, 40 billion dollars. You know, you'd have to Google it. So he's pretty bloody and pretty. I think he's in front on that of basically, in front of most things that aren't large countries, generally speaking. But actually, the reason why he doesn't give it all away now is because he knows he's better at making more money than if he gave it away to someone today. So when he does pass, he's got his plans of what he's giving to his children, not very much as I understand it, and the rest of it is all going to a foundation. Because then his competitive advantage, his alpha, whatever you want to call it, obviously, essentially dies with him. Although if I had to have a bet, I'd say Berkshire Hathaway will still be doing all right in 100 years' time. But that's the nature of running a good limited company, isn't it? So generosity is probably, authenticity is important. Generosity is probably the hardest thing to fake. Now, I'm afraid we're going to have to go just a little bit back into property education, because one of the things that I've read in the whole Sales and Marketing 101, I've listened to the courses and I've not done them because the high level concepts are enough for me to feel sick, quite frankly. But one of those high level concepts that make you feel sick is make sure you do some work for a charity. And you'll have seen it over the years where some of the gurus have tried to support a charity. And frankly, you can see a mile off what's genuine and what's not genuine. I'm very cautious about doing it because, generally speaking, a lot of people don't like to talk about, there was a good post from Gary Hall this week about people have started to add on charitable donations onto their invoices without asking. If it's £1, £2, £5, it doesn't really matter, does it? What if someone suggested paying that invoice £5 short and saying, so I've given the money to the charity that I want to support and I've taken it out of your money. Is that okay? Of course it's not okay. So one of the things that upsets people who work extremely hard about charitable donations is, you could talk about shelter here quite happily. You've got 6 or 7 people at the top of the organisation getting $100,000 a year salary who run a pressure group, who don't house anybody. Now, I still think there's probably some things that a shelter is needed in a society, and I would much rather engage with a shelter. I would love to engage with a shelter style character in a public debate that was fairly moderated, let's say. I think it would be an excellent thing to do, but it doesn't mean that I think they add value from doing that, nor would I ever give a penny to shelter. I would much rather give money to crisis. But I'm conscious of charity, and I know Patrick Sullivan would be a great example, genuine, straightforward guy, really does what he says on the tin, does some work in Malawi, done some brilliant work in Malawi, but pays for himself to go out there. He's not even raising funds to pay for the trip. His donation is costs and his time to do that stuff. Then he asks for your donation, which is very, very easy to give because you see where the money is going and the value it's added. And when you're going to, one of the poorest countries in the world and trying to sort out, educational facilities, it's a pretty easy cause to get behind, So that's that's us back to generosity in as little as 90 seconds, I'd say, Ross, to be honest.
I was just going to add, I've got a couple of kind of historic stories. So when I wanted to, so this comes back to the PIP thing and the value of PIP as opposed to the cost of it, because they're actually they're not related, I don't think. I wanted, and I'm sorry for using the pool analogy, I wanted a safe pool of people that I could chat to, talk to, have conversations with, have relationships with, share the good times, share the bad times, all that kind of stuff. And it was almost impossible to find anywhere. So I got involved in it because what I think Adam and Sue set up at the outset was that thing. So I used to go to the meetings and there's 100 people in the room or there's 70 people in the room and they're all focused in the right direction. And in the main, they've all been really decent. So they've helped me out. If I've got problems, I can get help from them. If they've got problems, they can get help from me. I've made more mistakes than anybody else in property. So hopefully I've learned more of the mistakes that you're trying to avoid. So I actively chose to find that network because it didn't exist in my own doorstep. So there was a real value, and that value took me to Birmingham to a meeting there, which where I met Adam, and that's how my relationship with all that came about. But similarly, when I wanted, I'm a child of 2008, so similarly when I wanted out of property, or I wanted a business alongside property, I set up a charity and ran the charity. So it was called Next Step Foundation. And I didn't do it for any other reason that when my dad died when we were young, we were broke, and he was a professional footballer previously, so we should have had money, we should have been set up. He did earn quite well, but financially my family weren't that smart at the time. So we set up this Next Step Foundation to help Premiership footballers and Premier League footballers and rugby players, and we had Olympic athletes in it, and we had 300 courses that we could help try and get them educated on. The thing about sports people is they don't know when their career is going to end. They could be 22 years old with 8-10 years in front of them, and it ends tomorrow because of a bad tackle or a bad training incident or however it works. But generally, with all these high-level athletes, they've been doing their training from 5 years old, so that's all they've ever intended doing. They don't follow traditional, I'm not saying everyone, but a lot don't follow traditional education because they know they're going to be an Olympic cyclist, or they get looked after in a group of people who are cycling all the time and doing all these things. After a year of running it, and that was that. So the reason for setting it up was that my main driver for setting it up was I wanted to try and understand social impact investing and try and find something to get into, which I did. But it actually took me away from the charity because the charity, although I was doing well, didn't give me anything back. The people that we were trying to help weren't actually as interested in getting helped as we thought they were going to be. And ultimately, that's what took us into, we did a training course for Hearts Football Club with some young children. And actually, you could suddenly see the benefit of helping the younger ones. You could actually get a cause and an effect out, or you could actually see the change happening. And you weren't getting bullshitted that, they were their lives. You were making an impact in their lives, which then got us into running our care homes for children business. So we handed the charity over and started that. So a bit of me looks at that and thinks, for me, that was paying it forward in some way. We had a shot at trying to sort out something best we could. I funded it, so it wasn't with anybody else's money. But the reality of it was, what I then got back in 18 months' time was the opportunity for another business, because I was able to learn through all the things that we'd done with the charity, how to then do the care home business. So it does show that kind of gratitude and paying it forward. For me, that's an incidence of over a 2-year period. You can see you've done one thing and it has led to the thing that you ultimately wanted. I just didn't know what that thing was. And Adam could tell you that because you were involved in those conversations at the start.
Absolutely. I think there is a kind of element of like sometimes where people I don't know, they support a charity and put it all over social media that we support this charity. They expect something in return for this. I don't think that's the way to support the charity, because you're not supporting it for what the charity does. You're kind of supporting what the charity does for what you want to get in your own thing. And I saw this story recently on Facebook about some act of generosity of someone, and then later on they needed something, but they didn't get it from the person that they helped in the past, but they got it from someone else. And sometimes like that generosity, like you just do it and you don't expect anything back, but you get it back from somewhere else or somewhere like in general, because you create that kind of environment around you. And that's I think the key thing. You're not generous to get something, you're generous to create the environment.
Go on, Jay, sorry.
I was about to say, you see a lot of this at the moment. I think just bounding back to Jordan Peterson, as he called this out. He was on a panel and a lady was like, "Oh, I do this, this, and this," and he said, "Well, why did you say that? Like, why did you say that out loud?"
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people on social media who like vloggers who go around and like give a sandwich to someone on the street or something like that. Why did you have to because you're doing it because there's an expectation of return. You're not being genuine.
You're doing it for subscribers. You're doing it for clicks.
You're doing it. I think they call it. You're doing it for
somebody gives you free sandwiches. What?
Yeah.
Ross is going to speak.
That's the next business, Ross. You heard it here first. But I mean, that's it. Like if you give with the expectation of getting something back, then you're not really giving something.
I think I would see, to circle back round to Pip as well, because of the question. I think from really, I first went Property Network in 2011, right? And I was horrified to start with and there's 30% of the people that I went and saw in 2011 and 2012 speak at meetings, right, are still around on the circuit, yeah? And that 30% of people, nearly all of them are pretty decent. Their ethics might not be perfect, but they by the def, they're still around in 2022. They clearly have something sustainable. They haven't been called out. They haven't been caught out. They haven't been prosecuted. They haven't been all the rest of it. Now, we know there's the odd one that seems to be like Teflon and slips through the net and all the rest of it. Absolutely. You usually find they reinvent themselves a number of times, and then they're not an educator now. They're they're a blogger, and then they're not a blogger, they're an influencer, and then they're not an influencer, they're a professional golfer or whatever they are. You know, that is the normal sign of, just like anybody who changes their phone number every 5 minutes, you know there's something going on behind the scenes, and you don't necessarily like it too much, right? But what I found from the corporate networking was what some of what you've talked about there is like instant gratification, which is a big problem in today's society, in that I give you this, you give me that, you owe me, now I've done this for you, right? None of us on this call have any kind or anywhere near that mindset, and nor do I believe that mindset serves anybody particularly well. But if you only want to do transactional business, you know, go and do it that way. You know, go and sell widgets, or go into the mass market doing whatever. You know, it just doesn't really work, and it goes back to Ross's high ticket point around property in general, I think, apart from anything else. But what I found when I went on the independent circuit was, you know, the people, I got so much more people put their arm around me and said, you know, I've done this for a long time. I remember one of the very best conversations I had, and I actually spoke to this person. I still do business with them. I was on the phone to them yesterday morning about something where we're selling a block of flats. Unfortunately, the tenants have got to leave because we're selling it because it's vacant possession. One of the tenants in particular has been utterly spectacular throughout the years. So we're looking at quite how much we can stand to lose by buying him a new flat somewhere else specifically for him. Now that's, wow. And again, I've only said that because the topic today is generosity, not because I expect plaudits for doing that. But that's genuine. We're going to do something that is outside of our philosophy. We're putting effort into it on a Saturday morning, etc., etc., etc. You know, we mean what we say, and we're going to do what we say on that front. But he, you know, 10 years ago stood up at a property meeting and said, look, I've been in this game 35 years. It's been good to me. I've just had a fire at a property. I've never dealt with a big claim like this before. If anybody wants to come and have a look around and hear the story of the insurance claim and why it happened and all the rest of it, and then the fallout and also the refurbishment and everything else, just give me a shout, come and have a coffee, whatever. And I just thought, that's the sort of person. And what then happened, we ended up 5 years after that going into business together. We've made money. Except, did he do that day with an expectation that would happen? He absolutely didn't, you know. But we all know that sort of side of things, the networking game is a long game. And if you go to something like that with an instant gratification mentality, or a you give me this, I give you that sort of thing, it doesn't work. So sometimes it gets a bit hazy, and that's where it gets difficult for people, because it's kind of like, well, if you're effective with your time, how much of your time do you spend networking? You know, well, some of it depends on how long you want to be in the game. Some of it depends on the Go on.
The question. So, like, if you're consistent being generous and all this kind of stuff, like, how do you then, like, actually ask for things, and how do you get things when you need them, or how do you ask for stuff where you need this? Because then sometimes
I think Adam's example of the chat there is actually a really good example of that.
Yeah.
Because he kind of he said, this is what's happening, this is my problem, and it attracted the right people. So by him kind of putting it out there, and he wasn't saying, oh, like, come round, I'll include lunch, it'll cost you 60 quid. Like, he just said, look, come and have a look at this building. It's been ravaged by fire. I've got no clue what's going to happen. Come along for the journey. Let's see what happens. Maybe we'll all learn something. And then that's obviously grown something out of it, right? Just by putting out what's going on, what you're doing, it will attract the people who can fill the parts where a need is required.
Yeah, that giving first certainly makes it easier than to. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a cup of coffee. That makes it easier to be able to ask those questions, doesn't it? And it's like you say, you know, we touched on so many points here. It's a long game. If you think you're going to rock up to these events and get something back instantaneously, well, you might be lucky, but I would question how much value there would be in that. Whereas, you know, I went around and did this and nobody'd ever heard of me for a couple of years, and then things do just start coming your way because you've been around and you've been generous and you've done the coffees and you've had the chats and you've shared your experience, and then it's much easier to say, actually, I need a bit of help with that. And that reciprocation is it is really nice to see. We see that a lot, like in the Property Sisters community as well. the only thing I would say kind of about these communities, and mine's a lovely community, Pitt's a lovely community. There's a lot of great communities out there, but they do attract the odd, and they are in the minority, I would say. But the transactional taker types, and you'll have seen my posts in the past. I've not had to do one recently, actually, but we try and actively filter for and try not to allow the taker types. Been subject to that quite a lot. I'm sure actually all of us on here have the people that will just take and take and take as much as you are willing to give, mostly in terms of time, some on money as well. But let's not go down that rabbit hole.
But I mean, we myself and Piotr, we set up the buyers club, and actually before we kind of did anything with it, we thought about it, we drafted a bunch of stuff, and we sent it to Adam and Ross, and we're like, look, we're thinking about doing this. This is basically, we've got some rules that we're going to put down there. This is basically what it contains. This is roughly where we're going to price it and do stuff like that. And Adam's first thing was like, it's too cheap. it was like, it was really too cheap. And we're like, well, actually, it's going to be a fixed number of people. And just to bring it back around to where you got to there, Helen, is there's an application process. And we thought actually that was a way that we were differentiating, because we're like, this is not it. Actually, part of it being so small is that it's a network. It's like a closed network. A Chatham House.
It's a very powerful. You put sort of 10, 12 people together. There's obviously much more intensity. As ridiculous as it sounds, I think you can even parallel that to Love Island or something like that, because people who spend that amount of time together, and there's very few of them. It's surprising the way that the relationships form as quickly as they do. Now, obviously, they're generally skin deep, aesthetic, non-long.
Now we definitely need to raise the price. But our auction buyers love Ireland.
But there is something about that number of people, and the fewer, the more intensity. Obviously, you've got to be somewhat commercial about it because it's your time and all the rest of it. But it also interestingly helps to turn. This is when you do it well, and I'm not suggesting that we do it. Other people have said we do it well, and that's a great thing to be. I'm not positioning us as the best in the business or whatever. But when you do it well, what you'll do is you'll turn Ross's point on its head about the high ticket nature of property. And what you'll do is you'll magnify, in the boardroom club that Rod and I run, we've given people advice that we know has saved six-figure sums of money, right? Then they're paying nowhere near that to be part of the club. So we know we've delivered exceptional value tangibly very, very quickly. Some of that value that people get will hopefully be there over time. And we'd like to think that everybody gets good value because we have our own, application process and filtering and selection. And actually we get some great recommendations from people as well who think they're putting the right people in front of us, which is fantastic when that happens. So Helen was the last person to do that. So thank you, Helen. That one's worked out really well. So, or it's certainly to start with anyway. So it really comes back to that's about, is there generosity in what we're doing? No, it's a sustainable, it's an effective, it's a great value thing that you will be known for, and that reputation will carry you through, and it will do all sorts of things for you in future. Piotr's question really in terms of how do you then ask for stuff, for me is, it's dead easy because I don't even need to ask for stuff really. People give me stuff and put stuff in front of me for me to knock over. If I then do need to go and ask for something, I tend to get a pretty good reaction from it. But it's the old, Gary Vaynerchuk calls it jab, jab, hook, doesn't he? Whereas I see it as more a sort of jab, 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 cross, 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 uppercut, then hook, because it's not, and I'm not thinking as strategically as someone like a Vaynerchuk is with his time and all the rest of it, which is why he's, a billionaire and I'm not ultimately. So there you go. But I'm comfortable in my shoes,
Well, this time next year.
We'll be millionaires. Excluding those on the call that already are, of course.
If prices and rents keep cracking on the way they are, we will be, mate. So don't worry.
Yeah, at least on paper, right? It's
yeah. You can't eat paper. And there's an interesting saying in the betting community, you can't eat value, they say. So the mathematical logic being, if you continually place good value bets over the time, then mathematics guarantees you to be a winner. But that doesn't mean just because I offer you, you know, say I give you 2 to 1 on this coin toss and it's a fair coin and it's an even money chance, but you've got to bet everything you own, right? Doesn't mean you should take that bet necessarily, because if you lose, you can't sit there and say, well, it was a good value. It's not going to do you any favors. So that's where you expand from value and expected value into bankroll management and risk management. There we go. 49 minutes 55. Risk management is alive and well. But you know, it's all part of the same coin of how you go about the problem of property investment, the problem of running a trading business, the problem of all the rest of it. You know.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
well,
who
that was obviously all of us kind of went, yeah, actually, yeah.
But I think it'd be interesting to know as well. We've had some great comments today from people, but it'd be interesting to know what's the longest term relationship you've ever had without anything of, you know, strictly commercial value coming from it. I've certainly known from people that I've known even 20 years ago and then kept in touch with, and then things have happened. Sometimes, like you were referring to earlier, they want a load of stuff for free. That definitely happens when I get people from school text me on my LinkedIn and stuff like that and want, you know, free consultations and this, that, and the other.
Well, they want free houses.
Hi,
Adam, can we get a bungalow in Solihull, please?
I might give them 15, 30 minutes sometimes, and 1 in maybe 10 of those might then turn into something, you know. So there is an element of a commercial aspect to it, but I try to be as generous as possible with my time. And as you guys know, I love the sound of my own voice as well, so it's a perfect mixture. But
well, I mean, there's an element of there are things that you have to put a little bit of effort into investigation, right? You can't offhand go, I don't have time for this, because you don't know what you'll discover from saying what do 15 minutes cost me? Well, actually, okay, I could be doing this, I could be doing that, but what could I uncover from a 15-minute conversation? And you go into it with that kind of open-minded, open-ended kind of thing to it, like, well, what's the harm?
Yeah, it's treating it like an opportunity. You don't know what it's going to lead to, or who it's going to lead to. Like I've been recording some. I know some of you guys have recorded some podcasts with Will Mallard recently, and actually after we'd recorded them, he's like, "What can I help you with?"
Yeah,
and it's just so nice, because actually that's quite rare that you get to an end of a conversation and somebody's like, "Is there anything I can do to help you?" And you're like, "Oh, I'm not used to that question," but it's really refreshing, and it says a lot about him and his generosity to me.
Yeah, and also I think his authenticity, because he means that, in my view, when I've spoken to Will, he means that. He does what he says on the tin, you know.
Yeah. I think he's got a really good interview style, and like you say, the way he kind of follows up with that. One of the best posts must be, sorry Adam, within the last 12 months, especially on the point of cost over value, was the post that he did. It was over a silly sum, like £100 or something like that.
Yeah, I know the one. Yeah, I mean, it's not a 5,000 word, you know, epidology that Adam would normally do. I mean, it's sizable, but at the end you were just like, yes, well, you could, every single word that was written, every single sentence, you could tell that that was the formulation of thought that he went through at the time. Like, he hasn't glorified any of it. None of it was prettied up. It all kind of matched, and it was just a brilliant example of just forget about the £150 or whatever it was. There's no conversation that needs to. Like, they inherited a building, and there were like existing tenants in a social housing kind of construct or whatever it is, and there was a tenant was like £100 and something odd pounds behind, and they'd inherited it, and he was like, just forget it, move on. And like start the relationship with this person on a good foot. It was brilliant, and it was a mind-blowing post. I remember it well. I look forward to it coming up on the Facebook memories. To be honest, it was that good.
Yeah,
I remember it well.
But someone post the link to that.
I will try to find it. Yeah, definitely. But it's you can't fake that stuff, Jay. You know, it's not possible because you can't teach. Again, through some pseudo-scientific BS American Marketing 101 course, you can't teach people to think like that. You know, you are what you do. Like I say, that's what it boils down to ultimately. And you know that question. And Will's asked me that question, Helen. I had a similar reaction to you. I was like, it is so rare that someone has that level of mentality, you know, where you look at that compared to the average LinkedIn message that we all get around, you know, like, oh, I do insurance, let me insure your properties, or whatever it is. And it's just like, how much business do you ever do like that? I mean, surely it's zero. Surely it's zero. Unless you, I mean, it must be 1 in 1,000 or something. It's worse than a cold call. You know, it's just utterly pointless in my view. But I don't know. I don't remember any meaningful business relationship starting with a cold call, realistically. But I'm not a transactional guy, realistically. I'm a relationship guy.
So we go through some comments that people posted, and just so that we.
Sure. So Tony said it was Julian Richer. Tony pointed out, which is the Richer Sounds guy, which is great. And I didn't know he'd written a book on it actually, but I look forward to having a look at that. The Ethical Capitalist. Sounds good. Going to be a big subject this year because wealth inequality is absolutely blown up over COVID, and that's what I was saying earlier. We're going to drift from in the post-COVID era. It will then be right at the top of the agenda again. How unfair it is that, you know, these people are there and those people are there. But I think I've said before on here, if it was truly endemic in where you start from, you know, in terms of inheriting wealth, then why would the top 10 richest people in the world not have inherited their wealth? Realistically, you know, that the system is brutal, and it doesn't treat, you know, it doesn't really provision for the poor and the sick and the disabled particularly well, which is why people say, you know, judge a society by how it treats its poor, sick, disabled, etc., old, etc., etc. You know, there is some truth in that, and that's where the market does fail, but still by far the best system apart from the worst system apart from all the others. You know.
Well, I mean, then you can go back to the equality of opportunity, equality to education, equality to.
Yes.
My wife talks about this all the time: equality to education, equality to food resources, equality. You know, that kind of thing. That if you can do that, then actually you give. I saw a post earlier on today, and it may be a very, very slight tangent, I hope. And it says, postulate that you were born 80,000 years BC. You're immortal. You save $10,000 a month, every single month, with zero expenditure. Fast forward to 82,022 years later. Elon Musk still has more money than you.
You're pretty old, though, aren't you? You're pretty old.
The end. Well, you're immortal. The end of that post actually got really kind of. There was a socialist kind of spin to how demonstrative that kind of wealth is, but I missed that bit out because actually it was quite fun to think. You know.
Yeah. Well, this is the whole. You know, do you feel that Elon Musk paying 11 billion in taxes, although that's not the relevant percentage of his net worth increase, is still more tax than anyone in history has ever paid in 1 year.
Exactly.
You know,
but I mean, how much of his wealth is paid
about that is your. I mean, I think that's pretty bloody good myself. You know, but you know, there's people who still not paying his fair share. It's like
he's paying more than anyone else.
Yeah.
But bear in mind, how much of that's real? Let's cut Elon Musk off to his bank, the First National Bank of America, wherever it is that he banks, and tell him to withdraw all that money.
Yeah, well,
and then hand it out to people in the street.
Like everybody else would say, I can't because I paid it in my tax bill.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, in terms
well, as soon as he dumps his stock, the share price starts tanking like nothing on earth. Yeah.
And then people, it's the same argument they have with Bezos.
You can't eat value, Jay. Remember, you can't eat paper.
You can't eat value. And the other thing is like the Jeff Bezos argument is like, well, I didn't tell people how much Amazon was worth.
Yeah.
Because when did I tell people that it was worth that? What about all the other shareholders that have been made millionaires, or even people who put a couple of thousand in, who have 20s, 30s, 40s of thousands? What about those people? You said it's nice to look at me as a figurehead and be aggressive, but actually the reality of the situation is, like you say, you can't eat the value.
Absolutely. Dom's point that you put on the screen there, Piotr, is another great one because it's very true. It's the old, you know. And Molly May said this, didn't she? She said everyone's got 24 hours in a day, and she said, but technically I am right, and of course she's right. You can't argue with construct. You know, there are 24 hours in every day, and of course some people decide to do different things with them to other people, and that's the richness. That's the danger of equality of outcome and the richness of equality of opportunity. But it's interesting you mention education as well, because I know Ray Dalio's super passionate about trying to standardize even across state to state, because it's very different in the US around the educational system. And didn't even stage that one. That's incredibly well timed. But he's super passionate about that. And in the UK we call it the postcode lottery, don't we, in terms of where you live and how good the school is. Although there isn't necessarily by any means a 100% correlation or anything anywhere near it, because you then find that certain cultures value education a lot more than certain other cultures. And if you want to really upset people, you can start listing who some of those are and who some of those aren't. But there's no value in doing that, because it still comes ultimately, for me, down to the individual and how you go about raising your children, if you have them, etc., etc. It's your real values. One of my parents' highest values was education, which came through in the education they got from myself and my brother. And it made a massive and lasting impression on me, to the tune of that's what I tried to do for my kids. But that comes back to you are what you eat, but you can't eat value,
Brilliant, guys. Well, I think you've all been super generous today with your time.
Yeah, we're over the limit. We're over the limit. We should probably start wrapping this up before my Atherogrovia kicks in.
Did I make up for last week today? Was that okay? Was that?
I think you did. Yes.
I just love that.
Please don't miss any more chats, because then we have to take a debate.
Thank you for letting me take it in those weird and wonderful directions. I really enjoyed it. Selfishly, I really enjoyed it.
We do.
I think it's been a great chat. Thank you, everyone, for commenting and engaging with us on the chat. And we'll be back next week.
Look forward to it.
With some other topic for discussion. Speak to you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.